The cabin leaned into the hillside like a tired prayer, its wooden bones silvered by decades of mountain wind. Inside, a boy named Ezra sat cross-legged on the floor, threading a needle through the torn hem of a blanket that had been his mother's. He was 11, but his hands moved with the careful economy of someone much older. Outside, the storm arrived not with thunder but with silence, a held breath before the sky split open. Ezra paused mid-stitch. Through the warped window glass, he watched the rain transform the valley into something ancient and unknowable. The drops didn't fall. They descended, heavy as grieving, turning the dust roads into rivers of memory. He thought of his mother, who had loved the rain, who used to stand in doorways with her arms open, laughing as if the water could wash away more than dirt. She had been gone 3 years, his father 2. The cabin was all that remained, a single room with a wood stove, a table that wobbled, and walls papered with his mother's charcoal drawings of birds she'd never seen. Eagles, cranes, a phoenix, half finished, its wings stretching toward a corner she never reached. Ezra had learned to eat little, to make a can of soup last 3 days, to trade firewood for flour at the general store 5 miles down the mountain, where the clerk looked at him with pity that felt heavier than hunger. He pressed his palm against the cold window. The rain blurred the world into watercolor. That's when he saw her. An old woman stood at the edge of the tree line, drenched and trembling, her body bent like a question mark against the storm. She wore a coat too thin for autumn, and her white hair clung to her face in silver threads. She wasn't walking toward shelter. She was surrendering to the rain, as if she'd been walking for years and had finally decided to stop. Ezra's breath fogged the glass. He should have been afraid. Strangers didn't come this far up the mountain, but something in the way she stood, motionless, defeated, utterly alone, made him recognize her. She looked the way he felt. He moved without thinking, grabbed his father's oilskin coat from the hook, pushed open the door against the wind's resistance, and ran into the downpour, his boots sinking into the mud with each step. "Ma'am," his voice barely carried over the roar of rain. "Ma'am, please." She turned slowly, and her eyes, pale gray like river stones, found him. They were ancient. Not just old, but ancient, as if she'd seen the world born and die 1,000 times. "There's a cabin," Ezra said, breathless, holding out the coat. "You'll freeze out here." She studied him for a long moment, rain streaming down her weathered face. Then, with great effort, she nodded. Inside, Ezra built up the fire until it roared. The old woman sat at the table, wrapped in every blanket he owned, shivering so hard the chair rattled. He heated water in a dented pot and poured it into a chipped mug, adding the last of his tea leaves, chamomile his mother had dried years ago, still faintly fragrant. "Here." He set the mug in front of her, her hands, gnarled and spotted with age, wrapped around it like she was holding something sacred. Steam rose between them. She sipped and her eyes closed. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was soft as falling leaves. Ezra sat across from her, suddenly aware of how empty the cabin was. How little he had to offer. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elara." "I'm Ezra." She opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked, the way adults usually didn't. Not past him or through him, but at him, seeing the boy who'd learned to sew and cook and survive alone. "You live here by yourself," she said. Not a question, he nodded. "Your parents?" "Gone." The fire crackled. Rain drummed the roof like fingertips searching for a way in. "And still you opened your door," Elara said softly. "For a stranger." "In a storm," Ezra shrugged. "My mother used to say the rain brings people who need finding." Something shifted in Ilara's expression, a crack in the ancient stone of her face. Her eyes glistened. She was right, she whispered. They sat in comfortable silence as the storm raged. Ezra gave her the last of his soup, vegetable broth thin as hope, and she ate slowly, gratefully, as if each spoonful was a prayer answered. He offered her his mother's bed, the only one in the cabin, and when she protested, he simply spread his blanket by the fire. "I've slept here before," he said. "It's warmer anyway." Before she lay down, Ilara paused at the wall of charcoal drawings. Her fingers traced the outline of the unfinished phoenix. "Your mother drew these?" "Yes." She had the soul of someone who understood transformation. Ezra's throat tightened. She died before she could finish that one. Ilara turned to him, her ancient eyes impossibly gentle. "Some things are meant to be finished by others." Ezra woke to silence. The rain had stopped. Morning light filtered through the window in pale gold ribbons, turning dust motes into floating stars. The fire had died to embers. He sat up, disoriented, and looked toward the bed. It was empty. Panic spiked through him. He scrambled to his feet, scanning the cabin. Ilara's coat was gone. The blankets were folded with military precision. On the table sat the empty soup bowl, washed clean, and beside it, a leather folder. Ezra approached it slowly as if it might vanish. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside were documents. Official papers with government seals and notary stamps. He couldn't understand all the legal language, but certain words leapt out at him like small miracles. Deed of transfer. Property, 847 acres, Blackwater Mountain. Transferred to Ezra James Hollis. Consideration, 1 night's shelter. His heart stopped. Beneath the deed was a handwritten note on cream-colored paper, the script elegant and flowing. Ezra, 63 years ago I was a girl like you, alone, afraid, certain the world had forgotten my name. A stranger gave me shelter when I had nothing to offer but gratitude. That kindness saved my life. It taught me that grace is not earned, it is given. I have spent my years building a fortune I no longer need. Land, money, empires of steel and stone, none of it warmed me the way your fire did last night. None of it fed me the way your soup did, thin as it was. This land has been in my family for generations. I have no children to leave it to, but I know now why I held on to it. I was waiting for someone who would open their door in a storm. Someone who would offer their last cup of tea to a stranger. The land is yours now, all of it. The forests, the meadows, the streams that run silver in moonlight. Build something beautiful here. Plant gardens, raise animals, finish your mother's phoenix, and when you do, let it fly. You gave me shelter when you had nothing. I give you the earth beneath your feet, because kindness is the only currency that matters. With more gratitude than words can hold, Ilara Winterson. Ezra read it 3 times, then he stumbled outside, papers clutched to his chest, and looked at the valley spreading below him. The storm had washed the world clean. Everything gleamed. The trees, the grass, the distant mountains that rose like cathedral spires toward an impossibly blue sky. The air smelled of pine and rain and rebirth. This land, all of it, his. He sank to his knees in the wet grass and wept, deep, shaking sobs that came from a place he'd locked away since his parents died. Tears for them, for the years of loneliness, for the impossible gift of being seen by a stranger who asked for nothing but gave everything. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, crying out in a voice that sounded like freedom. 5 years passed like chapters in a book written by seasons. Ezra grew tall and strong, his shoulders broadening with labor, his hands becoming capable of building what his heart imagined. He cleared land and planted an orchard, apple, pear, cherry trees that would take years to bear fruit, but he didn't mind waiting. He'd learned patience. He built a larger cabin with a wide porch, using timber from his own forest. He installed windows that faced east to catch the sunrise, and a skylight above the kitchen so his mother's drawings, now framed and hung with care, would always exist in light. He finished the Phoenix. It took him 6 months. He taught himself shading and perspective, studied birds until he understood the architecture of wings. When he finally drew the last feather, the creature seemed to leap off the wall, rising from ashes into flame, its eyes fierce with hope. The valley became known for the boy who turned solitude into abundance. Travelers heard about the orchards, the gardens overflowing with vegetables, the honey from hives he tended with gentle hands. They came to buy, but stayed to listen to the story of the woman in the storm, the boy who shared his last cup of tea, and the deed that changed everything. Ezra never turned anyone away. He built a guest house for wanderers caught in bad weather. He hired people from town who needed work, the single mother, the veteran who couldn't sleep, the teenager who'd aged out of foster care. He paid them fairly and fed them from his garden, and asked only that they pass kindness forward when they could. On the mantel above the fireplace, he kept Ilara's note in a glass frame. He read it every morning like a prayer. On the 5th anniversary of the storm, autumn arrived early. Ezra stood on his porch at dawn, drinking coffee and watching mist rise from the valley like ghosts remembering how to dance. He was 16 now, but he still felt 11 sometimes, still that small boy threading needles in the dark. A car wound up the mountain road, expensive and sleek, out of place among the pines. Ezra set down his mug and waited. The car stopped in front of the cabin. The driver's door opened and a young woman stepped out. She wore a business suit and carried a leather briefcase, her expression professional but hesitant. She looked up at the property, the cabin, the gardens, the orchard heavy with late-season apples, and something in her composure cracked. "Are you Ezra Hollis?" she called. "I am." She climbed the porch steps slowly, and he saw that she'd been crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup slightly smudged. "My name is Claire Winterson," she said. "Ilara was my grandmother." Ezra's heart stuttered. "Was?" Claire's face crumpled. "She passed 3 days ago, peacefully in her sleep. She was 97. The world tilted. Ezra gripped the porch railing. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "She saved my life." "I know," Claire said softly. "She talked about you constantly, about the boy in the storm who reminded her why kindness matters. She made me promise to come here after she was gone, to see what you'd built." She looked out at the valley, at the fruit trees and gardens and the smoke rising from the guest house chimney. "She said you'd understand what to do with grace." She was right. Claire reached into a briefcase and pulled out an envelope. "She wanted you to have this." Inside was a photograph Ezra had never seen. It showed a young woman, barely 20, standing in front of a ramshackle house in a city neighborhood. She was bone-thin, her dress patched, her eyes haunted. But she was smiling, just barely, because beside her stood an elderly man with his hand on her shoulder. A stranger who'd given her a room when she had nothing, on the back, in Ilara's handwriting. Boston, 1947. "The day kindness found me. I spent my life trying to repay it. Thank you for reminding me how." Ezra's vision blurred. "She established a foundation," Claire said quietly. "The Ilara Winterson Foundation for Radical Kindness. She left instructions for it to be run by someone who understands that shelter isn't just about roofs and walls. It's about seeing people when they're invisible. She paused. She wanted you to run it. Ezra looked up sharply. Me, I'm 16. I don't know anything about... You know everything that matters, Claire interrupted gently. You know that kindness is a choice. That one night can change a life. That grace doesn't require credentials. She smiled through fresh tears. There's a board of directors to handle the legal and financial parts. But the mission, the heart of it, that's yours if you want it. You'd have resources to do what you already do, but bigger. Help more people, build more shelters, fund more gardens. Ezra looked at the photograph of young Ilara and the stranger who saved her. At the chain of kindness stretching across 7 decades, linking them all. When do I start? He whispered. 10 years later, Ezra stood on a stage in front of 500 people who'd gathered for the Foundation's annual summit. He was 26 now, his face weathered by sun and purpose, his eyes carrying the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned that broken things can heal. Behind him, projected on a massive screen, was a photograph of his mother's phoenix drawing, now famous, the symbol of the Foundation. Beneath it, Ilara's words, kindness is not earned. It is given. He cleared his throat. The room fell silent. I was 11 years old when I learned that salvation arrives in storms, he began. That grace wears an old woman's face and asks for nothing but shelter. That a single cup of tea can change the mathematics of a life. He told them the story. The cabin, the rain, the deed that appeared at dawn like an answered prayer. Ilara taught me that we are all connected by invisible threads, he said. That when we pull one thread of kindness, the whole tapestry trembles. That giving what you can't afford to give is the only gift that multiplies. On the screen behind him, images appeared. The shelters they'd built in 12 cities. The gardens in food deserts. The scholarships for kids aging out of foster care. The tiny houses for veterans. The community kitchens where no one asked about money or status or deserving. We've helped 47,000 people find shelter in the last decade, Ezra said. But numbers don't tell the real story. The real story is this. Every single person we've helped has gone on to help someone else. The teenage mother who got a tiny house now runs a daycare for other struggling parents. The veteran who couldn't sleep now teaches carpentry to at-risk youth. The kid from foster care just graduated medical school and opened a clinic for the homeless. His voice broke slightly. Ilara used to say that kindness isn't an act, it's a wildfire. One spark, and the whole forest learns to burn with light. After the summit, Ezra drove back up the mountain as the sun set. The valley below glowed amber and rose, the orchards heavy with fruit, the guest houses full of people finding their way back to themselves. He parked and walked into the forest, following a path he'd worn smooth over the years. It led to a clearing where a single stone monument stood, simple grey granite with words carved deep. Ilara Winterson, 1928, 2023. She understood that home is not a place. It is the door held open in a storm. Ezra knelt and placed a bundle of wildflowers at the base. Thistle and yarrow and wild rose, things that grew fierce and beautiful in harsh conditions. We helped another 1,000 people this year, he said quietly to the stone. Kids, mostly, ones who remind me of who I was, scared and alone but still capable of opening doors. The wind moved through the pines, sounding like 1,000 voices whispering in agreement. I met someone, Ezra continued, smiling slightly. Her name is Maya. She runs the Seattle shelter. She has your eyes, that way of seeing people all the way down to their soul. I think you'd like her. A red-tailed hawk cried out overhead, circling against the darkening sky. I'm going to ask her to marry me, he said. And when we have children, I'm going to teach them what you taught me. That kindness is the only inheritance that matters. That we don't save people. We just hold doors open and trust them to save themselves. He stood slowly, pressing his palm against the cool stone. Thank you, he whispered, for seeing me, for the land and the mission and the reminder that I was never alone. You gave me a deed to 847 acres, but what you really gave me was permission to believe the world could be different. The hawk circled lower, its wings catching the last light like copper. I hope, Ezra said, that wherever you are you're warm and dry and someone is making you tea. I hope you know that the phoenix finally flew, that it's still flying, that it will never stop. He walked back toward the cabin as stars began to prick the deepening blue. Lights glowed in the windows, his home and the homes of others he'd invited in. The valley below twinkled with the lanterns of the guest houses, each one a small sun holding back the dark. Inside, he stood before the phoenix drawing and picked up a piece of charcoal. In the corner where his mother had left it unfinished, he added one final detail, a small figure barely visible, standing beneath the rising bird with arms outstretched, a boy learning that he, too, could fly. Thank you for walking with Ezra through the storm, for witnessing how a single act of grace can echo across decades, transforming not just one life, but thousands. We live in a world that often mistakes kindness for weakness, that teaches us to hoard rather than give, to protect rather than open, to fear rather than trust. But Ezra's story reminds us of an ancient truth. We are all one stranger away from salvation, one cup of tea away from transformation, one open door away from becoming who we were always meant to be. Elara didn't give Ezra land because he deserved it. She gave it because kindness itself deserves to be honored. Because a boy who would give his last blanket to a stranger is a boy who understands what it means to be human. Take a moment now. Breathe deeply. Let the story settle into your bones. Then ask yourself, when was the last time you opened your door to someone standing in a storm, literal or metaphorical? And who might be waiting for you to be their Elara, their Ezra, their reason to believe the world is still good? Because somewhere right now, someone is standing in the rain, and you are the cabin they've been searching for. What will you do when they knock?